Hi, Dennis.
Hi, Eric.
Just letting some folks in here. Hi, Amber, Christopher. Sorry, I'm running a few minutes late here. If you guys are game, would love to see your faces. If not, no worries. Um, we'll let folks trickle in here, but we'll get started here because want to make good use of everyone's time. Um, for new folks here, I do this every week. I know I've shuffled the scheduling around a little bit, give some folks a chance to jump in because sometimes they have sort of recurring meetings during the regularly scheduled time. Um, I've been part of the NSA now for over a year, moderating two job search councils. I'm not actively moderating any job search councils at this point. Everybody's since moved on. But my background's been in recruiting for the past 12 years. And prior to that, I was in software product development, product management. And basically, I'm just doing this to kind of give folks an opportunity to um, gain some insight into the recruiting process, the recruiting mindset, and I found that it could be quite valuable in terms of helping folks navigate their job search more effectively. And so, largely unstructured, sort of AMA, ask me anything kind of um, deal for today. And at some point, I was thinking about doing a sort of a resume roast kind of thing, if that's something that might be interesting to folks. Maybe I'll throw that out there to the group. But other than that, it's largely just bring some questions, bring some situations, and I could provide some perspective from a recruiter's perspective on the situation, and hopefully that could be valuable to folks. So anyway, let's just dive right in. I'll let folks jump in here as they come into the meeting, but I guess we could just start with any questions folks might have or any situations. Feel free to just raise your hand or just blurt it out, or else drop it into the Zoom chat, and we could take it from there. Any situations, any burning questions?
I can go, Eric. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure, Dennis.
Yeah, I don't have any specific questions, but I have been noticing, at least in the areas that I'm interested in, I'm getting a lot more like outside recruiters reaching out to me for some roles.
Yeah.
So my background is kind of pre-sale solutions architect or you know, post sales like technical account management roles.
Okay.
I think I've been attending. I joined JCS and I moderated. I think when was it? September, and I think that's when I September or October, and that's when I discovered you posted in the Slack group that you were starting this. So that's when I started attending. But
Yeah.
um, and so I guess I just wanted to hear from you. I know you work as uh, a staffing company, I guess, and
Yeah.
what do
Third party
you
external recruiter.
external recruiter? So
Mhm.
yeah, what are you seeing in the marketplace? Do you? Yeah. So that's kind of my question.
Yeah. So what I've seen over the past 12 to 18 months is just most of the recruiting that I've been doing over the past 12 years has been with early stage, early mid stage tech startups, tech companies. And what I've seen over the past 12 to 18 months is just quite a bit of a slowdown. And I think this is not news to a lot of folks. Quite a bit of slowdown in terms of hiring. And I think initially there was a lot of that I think was motivated just by kind of the economic cycle that we were in. There's a lot of tech companies that maybe overhired. Capital was flowing quite a bit, venture capital. Um, and and I think now, I think that was what I attributed to a lot of the slowdown too. But now that companies are sort of reorienting themselves, it feels like there's another component that might be contributing to some of the slowdown in hiring. Um, and I think one of those components is AI. And I think, I mean, this is my own speculation, kind of what I've been seeing. There's a lot of companies now that are doing more with less, and there's a lot of companies that are, just they're trying to shift their economics from growth oriented to just survival, unit economics to survival, and they're trying to do more with less. They're trying to stretch their capital, and so they're looking at ways that they can do that using some of these emerging technologies like AI. And that might be contributing to the slowdown in the hiring. Uh, I think it might also be contributing to just some of the rifts that we've been seeing. And so that's kind of what I've been seeing. On the recruiting side, recruiters are being asked to do more with less, and recruiters are, you know, typically over the past, prior to the past 2 years, a recruiter could handle like an internal recruiter. It's not uncommon for them to handle anywhere from, 5 to 10 requisitions. Ten's a lot, but depending on the kinds of requisitions, they could be asked to handle that as much as that. And now I think they're being asked to handle even more. And so that might explain, for folks that maybe don't have as much insight into, I guess, the recruiting process, that could explain, you're wondering like, oh, why aren't recruiters getting back to me? If a recruiter is handling 10 requisitions, or even in some cases more than that, it's really difficult for them to devote attention to candidates that they're not actively championing or shepherding along in the process. And I'm not defending them saying that they shouldn't get back to you, right? But that could explain or give you some insight into why you're not hearing anything back. And some of them have implemented sort of automated responses through their CRMs, through their ATS systems. And so sometimes candidates are job seekers are frustrated with that because they're like, they get a response, that's sort of impersonal. It's clearly automated. And so yeah, so maybe that'll give a little bit of insight into what might be happening when you see a lack of response or maybe even automated response. But not to digress too much, Dennis. So hopefully that kind of gives you some insight into maybe your question there.
Yeah, yeah. I was just saying that I think for me personally, like I've been getting more uptick recently versus like last year or even 5, 6 months ago.
Yeah.
I guess one question I have my friend Daryl who just joined us, I guess for the first time here. And I was telling Daryl about this group, and I know one question Daryl asked me is like because I was telling him he he's put his thumbs up. Um, he was asking me like how do recruiters find you like on LinkedIn? And I said I don't know. Like um, I guess they obviously search on LinkedIn and they must like something on my profile, but maybe you can talk about like how,
Yeah.
external recruiters would find a person. And Daryl's in design, right, Daryl?
Okay.
So
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. And yeah, thanks, Eric, for this session. Yeah, Dennis kind
Yeah,
of
sure.
shined a light on this. And yeah, thanks for the voice and helping us understand what your thoughts are. Um,
Yeah, no worries. So, whether you're an internal recruiter or an external recruiter, a lot of folks use LinkedIn as sort of their de facto database or CRM for connecting with talent. In terms of how they find you, right? It's, using LinkedIn Recruiter, they can do Boolean searches, which um, can search on things like company size, location, region, um, things like, you know, how long you've been with a certain company. So let's say you're with company XYZ currently. They can narrow down searches based on how long you've been with a company. So, for example, if I want to see people that have only been with a company for more than 3 years, I can constrain my search parameters based on that. If I don't want to see anybody that's been with the company for less than a year, I can parameterize my search to exclude those folks, right? And so there's a lot of different parameters that these recruiters can use in LinkedIn Recruiter to constrain and really narrow their search results, right? Um, so I guess to your question, Dennis, like how do they find you? Well, obviously they're doing these searches that are based on uh, your profile, right? And so with a bunch of different levers, they can constrain their search. So I think what that means for you as somebody that's looking for a position is, trying to make your LinkedIn profile. I mean, obviously you need to fill out your LinkedIn profile, right? And as a recruiter, what I'm doing is I'm basically parameterizing a search. I have a result set that comes back. And based on what I'm searching for, which is largely guided by the job description, as well as what I know about the company, the hiring manager, the team, and a lot of that's not entirely embedded in the job description. But based on the information that I know, I'll devise an initial search. I'll get a search result. And then as I start going through that search result, I might refine the parameters of the search to modify the list, right? And so the point is, you need to make sure that your LinkedIn profile is fleshed out, is filled out. Um, you're using certain keywords, and there's a lot of ways that you can do that. I wouldn't recommend like personalizing your LinkedIn profile for each job description you're going after. That was something you'd probably reserve for your resume, right? Um, Sorry, my son is outside my office door right now. It's summertime. Kids are home. Um, so, make sure you have a LinkedIn profile that's filled out. What I like to see as a recruiter on a LinkedIn profile, that's different from a resume is I like to see a little bit more of the human, a holistic picture of the candidate, of the person. And the about section is a great opportunity to do that. To kind of give a sort of a human dimension to your digital profile. I'm so sorry. Can you give me 1 second? Sorry about that. So what I expect to see out of a LinkedIn profile is a bit more of a holistic picture of a candidate. And a lot of times, if I'm sourcing candidates, I'll go to LinkedIn and do a search, and that'll be the first thing that I see typically, right? Is their LinkedIn profile. And then if I start engaging that person, then I'll see their resume. It could happen the other way around as well when people are applying. So if they're applying to a position, typically I'll see their resume first. And then the next thing that I do is I'll go to their LinkedIn profile. So a lot of times I'll have their resume and their LinkedIn profile almost side by side. And so I would think about, as a job seeker, I would try to make take use your LinkedIn profile as an opportunity to sort of augment your resume. It shouldn't just be one for one, because that'd be a missed opportunity. I'd try to use your LinkedIn profile to augment your resume, by adding more color, more dimension, and a bit of more of a human. Maybe you might even call it a little bit more informal, right? Um, So, so yeah, hopefully that helps, Dennis, as far as how folks are using LinkedIn, how recruiters are using LinkedIn and how they're coming across their profile. Um, Any follow-up questions to that?
Um, I was Daryl asked me that privately, so it was
Yeah,
more his question, but I do want to follow up on that. I think one thing it's interesting because like um your initial response was like you use a filter to make sure that the person has been working at the company for 3 or 4 years. Was
that's one
there,
example. Yeah, that's
yeah.
just one example.
Do you do that? Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, so in that specific case, it depends again, that depends on the client, depends on the hiring manager, depends on
Okay.
the nature of the search. But using that example, in a situation I would use that in is where the hiring manager might be sensitive to job hoppers.
Okay.
So if somebody's been jumping from job to job and they've been working at a job for whatever, less than 12 months or less than 18 months, and maybe that's been consistent, I would add that as a filter in my first query.
Got
Yeah.
it. Got it. The reason why I ask, and again, this is just me experimenting with LinkedIn. I was talking to another colleague that I met through some other meetup thing, but he was also um, part of the Never Search Alone job search
Yeah.
at a different job search console. I think he took it like a year before I did, but kind of long story short, he was telling me because I think last summer I was kind of like, oh, I'm not getting much traction from people reaching out, and so and again, this is just a tactic, and but basically, I actually got laid off. Officially, I think May of 2023. And so
Okay.
I took some time off and then I did started doing some consulting, but it seemed like so what my friend um what he suggests is like just instead of saying you got just say just you know as far as like your updates or as far as like where you are, just say that you're still working there. And then when the recruiter reaches out to you, you give your resume and actually give the correct thing where you're doing consulting on your own on your resume. Um, because he was saying that, some people, if they see that you don't, if you're just doing your consulting gig, they might completely rule you out because uh, you're, that can imply a bunch of different things, right? Um,
Yeah.
so I was just wondering what your thought is on that. Because like I was I was contemplating whether to switch it back and see if I'd get less hits. Because I know,
Yeah.
I mean, it just
A/B testing.
yeah, yeah. Because it was just like so that's kind of my thought is like like I want to post more. I know like what I've seen other old coworkers what they've done is they're interested in a particular topic, they keep posting about it, and then people
Yeah.
recruiters find them or employers find them like, oh, this guy's posting this stuff. And I haven't got my chance. I haven't gotten around to doing that stuff. I know that's the way to do it, but so those are some of my questions. Is like one, it's funny because like people reach out to me, hey, I wanted to, people will reach out to me random like, oh, can you submit my application because it looks like I'm still at Salesforce, but I'm not. So even old colleagues like, hey, can I'm like, oh, sorry,
Yeah. Yeah.
so, well, what's your take on that? And
So, yeah, so I'll give you some perspective. It's not uncommon for people to do that. And I think what you're suggesting is if you're laid off or if you leave a company, just basically leave your LinkedIn profile such that the duration just says present or something like that, right?
correct, correct.
Yeah. So it's not uncommon for people to do that. Is it misleading? I don't know. It's plausible, right? It's sort of there's plausible deniability there, right? It's like, oh, I didn't update my LinkedIn profile. I don't think recruiters, I think recruiters get it, right? Like they don't think that it's necessarily I don't think it's necessarily misleading, but at the same time, it could be a missed opportunity, right? If you're almost like purposely not updating your LinkedIn profile, it could be a missed opportunity, right? So if you were to actively update your LinkedIn profile such that it doesn't read present anymore, and you add a new, additional work experience, right, like consulting or whatnot, that could help you. And if you're not doing that, it could detract. So yeah, I don't know if there's one way to do it. I'll just share with you kind of my own perspective, right? If you were out, May 2023, that's a long time. But I also think that recruiters get it, right? They get it that it's tough right now. And so it's not uncommon for me to see people with, present. And when I end up talking with them, it's like, oh yeah, I was laid off 6 months ago or whatever the case may be. And so I think recruiters are a little bit forgiving about that. At least I would be, but I would also want to know, okay, that's fine. If you were laid off, whatever, 12 months, 18 months, whatever the case may be, then the follow-up question becomes, so what have you been working on, and what do you want to do next, right? So that becomes the important thing. If you just have present, does that help or hurt you? I don't know. I don't know if it helps or hurts you. I think it could hurt you if you have great experience following your departure from the company that you could spin or otherwise talk about, right? And you're just excluding it because you're worried about, your experience at Salesforce not reading present anymore. Um, so so yeah, I mean, from a recruiter's perspective, I think most folks get it. It's tough right now, and it's not uncommon for folks to be um out of work for an extended period of time, you know? So I don't know how much that stigma might be concerned. People might be concerned about that stigma. I think that because the next question is just what have you been working on lately,
Yeah.
and just making sure that it's relevant and compelling, and then you're able to kind of tell that story. That's what I would look for. I would, so I don't, I would hold it against someone, and this is just my own thing. I would hold it against someone to some degree, right? You have to look at the whole picture. If the person has doesn't have a good story for how they've been spending their time, you know? And I'm not saying that it has to be exclusively professional accomplishments per se, right? It could be, I maybe I'm different from other recruiters, but I tend to look at the holistic picture of the person, right? So if you spent the last, whatever, 12 months, doing some deep soul searching and gaining perspective, that's not necessarily professional, but a lot of that personal perspective that people develop when they go on sabbatical or where they travel or where they do some sort of volunteer work, it might not be directly related to their profession, at least on the surface. But what I've found is that it adds perspective and depth to the person that a lot of the clients that I've worked with have valued. They valued that perspective and experience, even though it's not directly like there's a title, that directly maps. A lot of the clients and hiring managers that I've worked with, um, have valued that. And maybe part of it, maybe I'm a little bit biased because maybe part of it is my influence as a recruiter in making a case for those people, right? And so part of it is you have to look at the recruiter that you're working with too, because they're going to be your advocate and champion, right? And so, the recruiter mindset is one where they want to make a placement. They're incentivized by that. They don't want that placement to fall out in 6 months, right? If they have any inkling that you're sandbagging your experience and that as soon as you find a better or bigger role, you're going to be off, you need to mitigate that up front. If they're looking at your trajectory and you've been a director, and now you're looking for I don't know, an IC position, individual contributor position, you're introducing that risk to the recruiter that the person is going to be gone in 6 months as soon as they find something better, right? So you have to kind of mitigate that concern, right? Um, but yeah, any follow-up questions? Because I don't mean to detract or deviate there.
No, that's a good question. I mean, when I give them my resume, I give them the truth. Like I have been consulting.
Sure.
Yeah, so it's, and I off and on with a variety of different um other companies, but it hasn't been like full time. So that's kind of my story. But I was just
Yeah.
kind of curious on what that is. I know we're
So
almost out
with
of yeah, we're almost out of time, but if there's somebody else that has other questions, and I'll give them the floor.
I just had a follow-up to what Eric was saying about like LinkedIn and how to like express when you've been out of work. Would you recommend something where, because I guess for me, I've been doing a combination of like soul searching and path, and is this what I want to do? But then also just like with the proliferation of AI, like spending a lot of time learning about building custom GPTs and advanced prompt engineering and stuff like that. So I guess what would your perspective or recommendation be in terms of like how to balance that and sort of tell that story in a
that's
medium like LinkedIn?
that's a great question, Amber, because here's the thing. You have to temper you have to temper the messaging in your LinkedIn profile. You have to temper your messaging in LinkedIn, your resume, even when you're talking with somebody, right? So, and what I mean by that is there's a lot of folks are doing a lot of soul searching right now. They're trying to maybe reinvent themselves. They're trying to figure out what their messaging is, what their, you know, candidate market fit statement is, right? They're trying to figure that out. And there's nothing wrong with that. The risk, um, and the reason why you have to temper the messaging is because when a recruiter is looking at you and your candidacy and your profile, your LinkedIn, all that stuff, again, recruiters are kind of risk adverse, right? And so you have to, the concern that they have is that you are not focused. And so soul searching is great, but you have to make sure you temper how you message that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Maybe you temper it by messaging, but by saying it after the fact that you've been out of, you took 6 months off, whatever, to go volunteer, to go, travel, to whatever, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you've done that soul searching, and now you've come back with more resolve around your life professional purpose, right? But to say it in present tense that you're currently doing that, as a recruiter, that would, set off like yellow red flags. And here's why. Because it would signal to me that maybe you're questioning your commitment to that career path or that role.
Gotcha.
And for me, that's a red flag, not necessarily red, maybe more of a yellow flag that Amber might change her tune in 6 months or 9 months and be a flight risk. Or she might not be happy with working in this role because she's questioning it, right?
So is that like within link? No, I hear you on that. And within LinkedIn, then is that like you do, like I've seen some people do a career break and then another job that's like actively looking. What's the best way of
I mean, I've
showing
seen all
that when
combinations. I've seen all
okay.
combinations, right? Um, what I've seen a lot of folks do in particular is sort of the consulting fractional gig where, they might express their current position as consulting. And what I would recommend is if you're going to do that, that it's legitimate consulting, like you have like legitimate clients that you can reference.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that would be ideal, right? Because I also see a lot of profiles that just are too vague about it. And it makes me question as a recruiter, like, are they really consulting? Or are they just putting that down there to make it look like there's continuity in their professional efforts or whatnot, right? And so if you could put legitimate clients that you're working on, kind of your accomplishments there, I think, especially if they're in line with your current career trajectory or roles or path, I think that adds more weight, you know. Um, yeah, I hope that answers your question, Amber.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, okay. Um, Any follow-on questions or thoughts or ideas? Again, I don't claim to have all the answers, but I'll give you my perspective as a recruiter and what I see other people doing and how I might react to something that's different. I mean, this whole job search thing is like you you want to stand out. It's kind of weird. Like you want to stand out, but you don't want to stand out too much. If you're standing out too much, it's kind of like, oh, you're doing something different, or kind of maybe that's too. Again, that the mindset is risk for a recruiter, right? They want to find somebody that's diverse, right? But not too diverse. It's kind of weird,
Yeah.
right?
Oh,
And
okay.
what I mean by that, I'm not talking about like the DEI stuff. I'm talking about, oh, this, talking about myself, for example. Like, um, I have a background in engineering, software development, product management, and now recruiting, right? And so I've been doing recruiting for like 12 years, right? But if I've had all those experiences within like the past 5 years, the recruiter would be like, oh, like that's great. It's great that it's diverse experience, but I don't even know, like, do you want to do recruiting or do you want to do product management? Like, where do you want to go with this, right? And so that introduces that level of diversity within a short amount of time introduces risk for the recruiter. But given that I've been doing it for 12 years, my trajectory is more recruiter right now than it is, say, product manager or engineer. And so even though my experience is diverse because I've been spending the past decade in recruiting, it's much more focused on recruiting. So the point is that diversity is great to a point, but if it's too diverse, it introduces more risk for the recruiter.
Gotcha.
If you wanted to meet recruiters where they're at versus recruiters trying to reach out to you, what's your lens on that? Like, how would you find a good pool of recruiters to make sure that you're in tune with them or they know you are out there versus I feel like recruiters are like car salesmen. It's not until they come on their lot and then they kind of swoon them. But is
Yeah.
there an opportunity where you can uh,
So,
go to the
uh,
mall of
yeah, yeah,
recruiters
yeah.
and shop around?
So there's a two-pronged sort of strategy to this. One is to actively go out and try to find a recruiter that you could build a relationship, right? The other approach, and these are not mutually exclusive. The other approach is just to be findable, right? Because the recruiter, that's their job to find people, and they know how to find people on LinkedIn, for example, right? So recruiters know how to find people, and so you want to be findable, right? And that's where it goes back to like being sort of the same, but also being diverse, right? And so you're in design, Dwayne, right? Is it Dwayne?
Daryl.
Daryl, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Daryl. So, uh, if you're a designer, right,
Clash Royale.
you want your profile to
You
look
finished with everything?
like a solid designer. But uh, once you've hit that mark, you also want to differentiate yourself from the other designers, right? And
yeah. I think
so,
that's the lens, the challenge right now is because design's on different levels all the time. It's
yeah.
not like I'm a manager. It's more of like I'm a designer at different levels at any point. If there's a company that has good interests, I'm probably willing to take a different level. If there's a area where it's less desirable, I probably go for more of a higher level. So
Mm,
the range is probably three steps, and then where do you kind of land? And then if the ecosystem is not hiring at the higher levels, how do you prep yourself for a lower level or sustain at a lower altitude while you maintain
yeah.
enough fuel to get to the other side?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, Daryl. I've seen a lot of folks like almost having to kind of sandbag their experience, and I've talked about this last week and I think the previous week because it's really important. A lot of people are asking this question, right? Because if you're at the higher level, as you go higher in level, CEO, C level, there's just less of those opportunities available, right? So a lot of
Yeah.
those folks are like, okay, I'll take a VP position or I'll go take a director position or whatever, right? But going back to your question about how to find a recruiter, Um, the second thing that I mentioned, right, is you have to be findable, right? But the first thing that I mentioned is, going out and actually finding recruiters. And in order to do that, you need to figure out, you have to understand that recruiters are different. Like there's different kinds of recruiters. So you have to find a recruiter that is working, one, in the region that you are or you're looking, right? Because a lot of recruiters are geographically oriented. Their networks are in certain geographies or regions, and their clients are in certain networks or certain regions, right? So find a recruiter that is in your geographic area. Find a recruiter that is working in your industry or function. Some recruiters only deal with CTOs or CFOs. Um, and that's typical of the higher level, right? Um, there's some recruiters that only work with designers because that's what they specialize in. Some recruiters only work with startups or early stage tech companies. Some recruiters only work with um, locum tenens like healthcare, right? So it just really depends. Um, I would try to find a recruiter that is versed at working with not just function and industry, but also seniority, right? And then once you sort of narrowed that, then you can try to figure out how to go after them, right? There's different, like Facebook has recruiter groups, LinkedIn has recruiter groups. And if you can, sometimes they're strict about who can get in there, sometimes they're not. But if you can kind of weasel your way in there, sometimes you have to answer questions as if you're a recruiter, right? If you can kind of weasel your way into there, then you can get some insight into what people are talking about, sort of the recruiting mindset, right? And you can even start to connect, right? A lot of recruiters are motivated by, especially if they're third party recruiters, they're motivated by obviously making a placement. So finding the right talent for their requisitions, but they're also motivated, the ones that are more senior, especially the third party recruiters that are more senior, they're motivated by finding new job requisitions, new clients. So if you can play to that, that can help you get recruiters' attention because a lot of recruiters are very like they're time strapped and they're bombarded by people that are looking for their next opportunity. They're bombarded by people wanting to get time with them. So
Yeah, it is a challenging space. It's almost like you're holding two ends of the rope as a recruiter, which I find it very challenging in your role. I'm assuming because here you have a client that's trying to make a connection. You're the conduit to connect to the actual asset, which would be the person target for the job. But if you have multiple people on the other end of the rope to target to, you just don't know who and when and where. But I mean, in the past, I've reached out to like Acquaints and like a source for like a consultant agency. Your lens of like a consultant agency versus individual consultants, because I think like a little bit about what Dennis is talking about is like people are reaching out to him. Are those more or less individual recruiters coming after him, or are they the larger groups coming after them? Because I think that's the lens, and yeah, a great call out for the like the Facebook groups and like those types of groups. But yeah, just trying to understand that ecosystem a little bit more, and then trying to see
yeah,
if
yeah,
there's
sure.
a gamification of interacting with recruiters quicker and faster.
Yeah, so you have to understand sort of the mindset of what their incentives are, right? Then you can kind of play to that, right? And so the ecosystem includes, really quickly, the ecosystem includes internal recruiters, right? These are employees of the company that they're recruiting for. Let's say Coca-Cola, right? They have internal recruiters, but they also work with external recruiters. And usually they engage external recruiters, also called agency recruiters, third-party recruiters, headhunters, search firms, right? Executive search firms. Those are all sort of synonymous with third-party recruiters or third-party agencies. They have a little bit of a different incentive structure than the internal recruiters. Um, there's also HR that's typically employed by the company that they're providing HR services for. They're usually employees, although fractional HR is becoming more of a thing now. And so you may have a fractional HR person that's serving part time for a portfolio of companies, a portfolio of client companies, right? Especially this happens, this is particularly more prevalent with earlier stage companies that are trying to manage their HR costs, right? They don't need a full-time HR person, for example, right? So that could be another angle that you might look for because they get insight into sort of the hiring plan, the hiring needs. And if you can get out ahead of that, that could be, and then, because if they know that, whatever Q3, they're going to start hiring for these kinds of, for these departments. And if you catch wind of that, you can already start orienting yourselves to connect with the hiring manager right before they're bombarded, before they're even thinking about a job description, before they're already, fielding applicants, right? You can start connecting with the hiring managers at the company via LinkedIn, following them, commenting on their posts, right? But how do you get that information? A lot of times, HR folks have insight into, yeah, oh, they're going to be ramping up hiring in Q3, right? And then how can you connect with HR folks, right? I'm just using HR as an example. I think a lot of it also applies to hiring managers themselves. So if you're a designer, maybe the more senior folks, the senior design folks are also in different groups or forums. So keeping your eye out for that. As far as the rest of the ecosystem, you can sort of stratify agencies, right? Because agencies have account managers, they have senior recruiters, they have more junior recruiters, they have sourcers, and they all typically work, under an agency. And there's different sizes of agencies. There's like mom and pops. I'm what you might call a full desk mom and pops boutique recruiting firm. But there's other recruiting firms out there that are huge, right? And when you're working with a huge recruiting firm, you have to understand which individual you're working with. Are they somebody that just graduated from college and they're completely insulated from the hiring manager at the client? Or are they an account manager that only does, you know, their their scope is bookended, right? Um, so you have to kind of size up the folks in the ecosystem that you're working with, and that'll help you manage expectations, but manage your expectations. It'll also help you navigate how you most effectively work with with those folks, right? Um,
Yeah, I think those are great feedback and maybe one other thing I wanted to throw your way is the frequency. Like if you let's just say you went after a particular company, you sent in a request. Are you working with that agent or are you working with the company at that point? And then if you see a new, let's just say you didn't get that role and then you see a new role in the next week, is it too quick to go right back in, or is it still the same pool of agents, or is it, what's your lens on that? Like if you see, like you really want to get into a particular company, you're really trying, um, is it the small pool of agents that handle all incoming requests, and then they say, "Oh, this person tried for multiple types of things"? Um,
yeah, there's a
what's your
risk
lens
there.
on that, like the frequency and the
So
pattern?
similarly, you need to size up the company, right? Company and what their recruiting organization and kind of looks like. So if they're a larger company and they're multinational, for example, right? They have probably different recruiting departments, maybe based on region or a department, right? If they see multiple applications come in for varied roles from the same person, it's kind of discouraged because again, you're increasing the risk, flight risk, right? If Daryl wants to be a designer, he's applying for a designer role, but he's also applying for I don't know product marketing and whatever, right? An account management role and this and that role. It's like, okay, well, what's Daryl really good at? What does he really want to do, right? It introduces too many questions. And when you make a recruiter think too much, it's like they'll just move on. It's like, okay, let me go look at.
What if it's on the same ladder though? Like let's just say there were no openings for the higher level, but you were willing to go and submit at a lower level. But now the higher level comes into play, and now you're trying to go for a higher level after a lower level. Do you pull yourself automatically out of the running there, just in that
It
envelope?
introduces it introduces risk and too many questions on the part of the recruiter.
Okay.
I mean, there's a trade-off. There's a trade-off, right? Because if you're applying to more, you might have more quote unquote coverage or more surface area for them to connect with you, right?
Yeah.
But and that's one of the maybe the strategies or the thoughts. And I'm not saying that the strategy is always valid or legitimate. It depends on the company, depends on the recruiter, right? So you're increasing the surface area with a given company. That's one strategy, and it could work to your advantage. How it could work to your disadvantage is if the recruiter and or recruiters see that Daryl is applying to multiple positions, it introduces a lot of questions. And when you start introducing too many questions, or it becomes a source of uncertainty and increased risk for a recruiter.
So, can I interject?
Yeah.
And Eric, thanks for staying. I think this is longer than you anticipated, but I guess Daryl, it just depends on which, and this is my experience. It depends how big the organization is. So most recently, I had interviews with Microsoft and then Amazon, AWS in particular, and I remember the recruiter. Um, when I spoke to a recruiter, they said essentially in both cases, essentially, if this doesn't work out, would you be open if I pass your resume to my other recruiter friends that I might be hiring in a different department? So in that case, it's okay, I guess. Like I guess you wouldn't they some recruiters, if they're nice enough, they'll pass it on to your resume to a recruiter that
Yeah.
might be recruiting for a specific it's the same kind of, the role that I was applying for is either it's a customer facing engineer role, whether it's post or pre-sales, but it might be in a different department. So it just depends, I guess what I'm saying.
Yeah. If I can just add to that, Dennis. So like a situation like that, I could see, and I've seen it happen. And where it happens is where that recruiter's built a relationship. Let's say in your example, Dennis, the recruiter has worked with you, uh, and maybe it just wasn't the right fit for either role or that particular team or whatever the case may be. But that recruiter sees something in you that overlaps with the overarching need of the company. And it could be something as simple as a culture fit, right? And so maybe that recruiter sees like, oh man, Dennis would be a great culture fit at Amazon or whatever the case may be. Um, and if that is something that's highly valued at the company, then you're kind of maybe whatever, halfway there. And then it's just about finding sort of the right role or the right time or right department, right? And so for that, that's huge for that recruiter to say, hey, let me see if I can pass you over to one of my other colleagues that might be in a different region or different department or something like that, right? So if you signal some flexibility with region, and you know that the company has multiple regions, like they may do that for you. They may say, hey, I think you'd be great at this company, but right for whatever reason, the timing is off, the department is off, whatever. But let me introduce you to so and so who is on the other side of the country. They may have some other requisitions that I have no visibility into, right? And if you can get an endorsement like that, that's great.
Yeah, the one, I mean, this is like my current situation is I said, yeah, well, I opted to go for more of a senior role at this place, and then now a staff role comes up, so it's like one or two levels above. So it's just a matter of do I or should I just keep reworking the network that I had with the first interactions with the recruiter and try to build the trust there, or should I just try to come in fresh from the new role and see if I go into the front door that way? Because
If you feel like you have a good relationship with that recruiter and you can speak candidly with that, I would ask for their recommendation.
okay,
You let him or her know, like, hey, I'm really interested in this company because of X, Y, and Z, right? Make a good and compelling case for that, and let them know that, I'm again, there has to be a certain level of trust, right? Um, but if you feel like you have a good rapport and a good trust with the recruiter, you can, and you feel comfortable asking them that question, right?
yeah,
And so like in Dennis's case, it sounds like, at least on the surface, it sounds like that there's a good relationship with that recruiter to the extent that that recruiter would internally endorse or make that referral or recommendation. At least on the surface, from what you're telling me, Dennis, it could. There's also that case that they're just trying to get rid of you, right? But you have to kind of feel that out, right? Um, I suspect that it's more the former, that you've built a good relationship and they see something in you that overlaps with the overarching company need, and they're making the time to make the introduction to another recruiter, right? Because they're building social capital there, right? If I pass somebody over to another recruiter, I'm not going to pass them a candidate that I don't think is strong, right? Because that just it hurts my social capital, my professional capital.
Yeah.
But if I pass somebody strong, they're like, "Oh, thank you, Eric." They're going to scratch my back later on, right? So
Yeah,
that
yeah.
I suspect that's what's happening.
This was like the initial meeting. Basically, he was asking me if I had experience in Gen AI stuff, and I said, well, I have a couple things, but I don't know if I qualify as well. He was just saying like, well, if anything, I could, I'll pass it on to the hiring manager, and if it works out, great. If it doesn't, then there might be. And he did say we have open recs in other regions. Would you be willing to relocate? So, um,
Yeah,
so that was kind of the initial discussion. But yeah, thank you.
yeah, yeah. I have to jam, you guys. I really appreciate hanging out with you, and I do this every week. Sometimes the day and time is different, but usually I do it Thursdays at 2 p.m. Mountain. So tell your friends, come on and challenge me with your questions. I might not always have the right answers, but at least I can give you my perspective.
Thank you.
Thanks,
All
Eric.
right. Thanks. You guys have a great week. Talk to you soon.